March a year ago, somebody asked me about alcohol inks, and I hadn't used them at that point. Alcohol inks can be used in your resin, most resins. I wouldn't use an alcohol ink on this one because it is the most sensitive to water, to moisture. And even though your alcohol is 91% or whatever, there's still a little bit of water in there, I think, that may mess things up. But give it a try. You know, if you don't like it. Here's something that I didn't do that I was supposed to do. I have some samples of my stirring cups, and I want you to take a look at them. I'll start some at one side and some at the other. Some of them are real smooth. And that's where my clear cups were. I want you to take a look at the inside and see the differences between the way they look. What do you notice? They're all dried. You notice anything? Well, just pass them around when somebody knows it. Let me know. Bubbles. Exactly. The cups that show bubbles are the Alumilite Clear Slow that weren't put in. I mean, the pieces were put in the cross pressure pot, but I didn't put the glasses that I mixed them in. So you'll see the bubbles there, and if that would be what it would look like if I didn't use a pressure pot. Now, some people I've heard can actually use this without a pressure pot, and I commend them. I can't do it. I don't want to waste the opportunity or scare myself with that. So, okay, the Pinata alcohol inks are really good for your resin, but they're not as color fast as mica would be, or the liquid resin colorants that you can buy for it. I know both of the craft store, or both of the wood turner stores in the area carry some colorants that are made for resin. And that's always a good thing to use. And you know it's not going to be a problem. But I haven't had a problem with any of the colorants that I've used. So just try it a little bit. Okay, let's talk about any questions about colorants or resins to choose, or yeah, Wayne? The question was, is there any reason you can't reuse those once they're dry? No, I do reuse them as much as I can. Now, the one where I forgot to take the stick out, I may have to throw that one away. Did you just break it loose, Steve? Forgot the stick out, and it's there. But the others, I have many stacked up once they dry. And I don't, if I've used a clear in one container, I don't care what color it is, because once it's set, once it's hardened, it's not going to come out. These I do clean up, and any of the smaller measuring cups. These I reuse as much as I can, because they do get expensive after a while. Molds for casting. Move this out of the way. And these out of the way. A regular mold for casting could look something like this. This is, see if I can get the letters right, HDPE, is that what it's called? These are made, this particular size and other sizes are sold at Woodcraft and at Rockler. Yeah, they have these. They're very good. You do have to unscrew them to take them apart to get your piece out. These blocks that I made here, this is only half of what was made at the time. I made this in a 5x5 block, and I've already gotten 3 pens out of it, and probably I could get more. I can get at least 3 more out of that. But they have to be taken apart with a screwdriver. Little silicone molds in all different shapes and sizes. They're real handy to use and easy to get your piece out. These silicone molds that are made, this is a harder silicone just because I went from a soft silicone to a harder silicone because my soft silicone did start to wear out the way I was using them. This is one of the ones that we made for bottle stoppers. And what we did when we made it, there's a little hole in the bottom, and we put a piece of wood with a piece of with a screw in it that is the exact same size as the bottle stopper jig. Bottle stopper mandrel, that's what I'm trying to say. And because it's could come out, I put the little band on it to keep it in. But I'm going to pass this around because I've already put some resin in there, some blue resin. And now I can add things to it, like my spaceman, or I've got some real cute aliens I want to use soon. And after I put that in there, and this one's being built right side up, after I put that in there, then I'll put some other resin on top of it and then let it dry, let it harden. And then all I have to do is put it on my stopper, my mandrel for pen blank or for bottle stopper. Sorry. I'm sorry. Somebody say something? Okay. Another type of mold. This is one that I did not make. I bought it. This type of mold is handy because you can actually build around this your tubes in here. It's made so that your tube goes in the center. It's lifted up off the bottom, and you use the silicone plugs to hold it in place. You have to do a little bit of prep before you use them, but it keeps the plugs keep the tube from getting filled up with resin while you're pouring the resin.
Do you have to sand the tube?
Yes, if they're not already sanded. The question was, do you have to sand the tubes? I sand the tubes if they're not already marked, no matter whether I'm using them in this or after I've made the module, the piece to put in, because the sanding does help the resin stick. With a piece like that, a mold like that, you can actually glue a piece of paper around the tube and then put clear resin over it. And you have one of those almost, well, it's transparent on the outside, but you can, people put star or flags in there or happy birthday or whatever. You could put a piece of paper on it. But there are some different things that you have to do with paper before you put it in resin. Steve.
And this bottle stopper that you've got, this is a very smooth finish, this blue that's already in here. So the next set of acrylic that you pour in here is not going to have any problem adhering to that?
They do tell you. The question is, that already has a smooth surface on the bottle, on the resin that's in there. And if you're adding resin to something that's already hardened, you are supposed to sand it to let the new resin adhere to the old resin. And yeah, I would do a little bit of it. I won't work too hard on it, but I would do a little bit. On some of my pieces, this one didn't. I've got cameras. Where do I have cameras? This one? Okay. We have cameras? We have one camera. Okay. I wonder if I have it here. Okay. This one, I did the blue first and I let it harden. And okay, there I can see it. All right, technicalities. Anyway, I did have the blue here, and I'm pretty sure that I didn't smooth that one down because I can see how smooth it is. And then I put the swans on it and poured the other resin on top. In theory, you're supposed to, but I've had them stick most of the time. This was made in the block, the big orange block. with 3 of them together. What did I do with my orange block?
It's in the mold, it's in the pressure.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad somebody's keeping track of me. Okay, these 3 were made in that orange block. And you could actually put the pieces together somewhere. Maybe that one wasn't. But I just cut it up at 2 inches because the block was 2 by 6. I just cut 2, 2, and 2. And this was made out of one of them where I had glued the wood in and used that. I love doing that. That's fun because it's like you get 3 for 1. Here's another one that I did. I added wood into this one. It started to float a little bit. I had attached it, but it didn't stay there. And then this piece was just taller than the mold. All I have to do before I use this is first decide if I want a 3-inch bottle stop or 2. If I want 2 3 inches or 3 2 inches. So where I cut it makes a difference. And then just sand off or cut off the top and drill the hole for your mandrel. Or there are other things that you can use for your bottle stoppers. You have, I showed you the bottle stopper mandrel. There's a couple of brands of that out. And if you happen, like me, to screw up the drilling and you have to refill it with resin, or for whatever reason, you can buy these. These were from Woodcraft. This is just a little tool to help insert these little inserts, yeah. Threaded inserts, yes. You make your hole bigger than you would for the bottle stopper, and then you put this in, glue it in, and you've corrected, and nobody will see it because it's in the bottom. Okay, I was very happy to find them because on the internet, when you get them, they're terribly expensive. Yes, Steve. Mm-hmm. Okay, did everybody hear that? Steve has found that heating up the area to put the bottle stopper, not the insert in, helped him get them in place. I wouldn't have thought of that so much. I would have probably just drilled a bigger hole.
Sometimes the blanks of acrylics you get from Woodcraft can be old enough that they've gotten brittle.
Yeah.
And so if they are brittle, and I found that out, then I will use heat to put in a brass insert. And I heat both.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Did y'all hear he will heat both this and the insert? Question. To cut it from this into pieces, a table saw, or you could use your bandsaw, except I can't cut a straight line with my bandsaw yet, so table saw. Still learning a lot of the tools. What else was I going to get into on this? Oh, when you're using a mold, these molds, this is a 2-step mold or 2-step process. The first one makes the shell like this. The second one, you take the shell and you use it, put your resin in. That's what I did with the one. I can't use mold release on this. Why? The residue would affect the next layer of resin going in there, and it would keep the inside parts, like the color parts, from sticking to the format, to the outer layers. So you can't really use it here, which thrills my husband beyond belief because he has to do it to get them out. It takes a while to work it out because this is a stiff one. When I was using that pink resin, pink silicone rather, they were easier to get out, but eventually they started tearing. So I went to the firmer type. So, you know, which do you want to do, quantity or make muscles work?
Do you buy the silicone?
Yes,
You buy them.
I buy it. The silicone that I've used actually comes from Lumilite. coming on and off. They have several different kinds. And I usually call them up and say, I want to do this. And they'll tell me what brand, what style to use.
What do those generally run?
Are you talking about these? I made this. So yeah, I made this with their silicone. I haven't gone through the whole process of these, have I? I started to, but I don't think I finished. I told you that I draw the design on paper, give it to my son who puts it into a 3D graphic maker and makes a 3D rendition of it and saves it in a certain file type. And then he prints it on his 3D filament printer. I have tried to print something on my 3D resin printer. I've not been happy with the results because of the resin I used. If I do enough, we're talking about resin here for putting things together, but the UV resin that they use on 3D printers is a different combination. It's the UV sets it off the light. And what I tried wasn't good enough for me. It came apart. The resin didn't stick together well enough to make pens out of it on a regular basis. Now, if I try another resin, another brand or another type, I might say that differently, but right now as it is, I will get my originals. These are the originals, by the way, that were created on a 3D printer. They look just like the ones that I've made. These were made in my pressure pot with my resins. That one, yeah, don't have that one. But, so this is what they look like. And I have to keep them separate because it's really difficult to tell. Since the mold making material actually picks up some of the grain that's in this, when I told my son what I was using this for, he said, oh, you don't need to have it smooth, do you? I said, well, I guess not. So he just runs it quickly on his printer and doesn't get rid of all of these grooves, but we trim them off anyway, so that's okay with me. But that's part of when it comes from him. Other questions?
Yeah, when you do wood and acrylic, you got like the steel boys.
Yes.
Maybe you want to turn. You have to, especially before it finishes, get that wood, the nice, just animate with the wood.
Okay, the question you're asking is if you're using wood and acrylic together, do you have to treat it anything special? If you're making a hybrid. And I do almost the same between them. I don't like to wet sand the wood. Some woods are okay to wet sand. But I really don't know that till I start playing with it. So what I usually do is I dry sand them to at least 400, and then I take the micro grits and go across them. And I have, this one I think was just finished with Jeff's, what is it called? Yeah, the grit that he does, that he makes, has for sale. What Yorkshire grit, that's it. I was trying to think, that's what I usually finish them off if they've got wood in them, because that's good for both products. I try to stay away from getting the wood wet, especially if I know that it's a porous wood, still in a porous state. However, if the wood was treated in my vacuum chamber, then I'll go ahead and use water on it as much as I want, because the cactus juice for me. If I cut out, let me know. There's one thing I want to go back over because I blew through it thinking nobody was interested, but I had enough questions that it'd be good to go through it again. Pens, I just have a couple of samples left that have all these designs in them. Those are totally resin with a pen kit inside. The designs are all mine. I created them. I designed them on paper. And then I had my son make 3D replica. 3D replica pen is this rainbow effect. In the first color, and then I usually put another color and another color to give it a rainbow effect. I call this one rainbow, big deal, right? This was the one that was made out of the 3D filament printer. I've tried to make some on my 3D resin printer, and I'm not happy with the resins yet. But on the 3D filament printer, my son knows exactly how thick I want everything because we've gone through it. So he made this for me as a one-time thing. And then he made another one and another one and another one as I came up with other ideas. And then he thought he taught me how to do it, and that didn't work. So he still will have to make mine for me. But my master, I'm not using this again unless I have to create a new mold. When I want a mold, I'm going to take a mold like this one. This one right now has a little bit of resin in it, but it would be empty. And I would take his master that he got. I would put this down on a level surface, hopefully. I would mix up some silicone. There's a couple of different silicones that would work. One, that pink that I talked about, that I started using, that eventually wore out. I mean, more than 20 or so before I, sorry. Are you talking? With Alumilite's help, they recommended I go to a different silicone, one that had, I can't remember what the base was, but they knew exactly what I needed. Much more firmer than the pink was. So it's a little harder to get it out, but this is probably made 20 or 30, and there's no sign of, well, to make this, I took the original, put it face down in my mold, and poured in the liquid latex or the liquid silicone. I also picked it up a little bit, make sure I got the resin, excuse me, the silicone inside the grooves. Sometimes if it's like this one and there's small areas, I'll even pour it a little bit directly in there to get to all the corners, and then flip it over and pour more in here. And I pour the silicone in there until it comes up to the top, which actually covers this mold, this original, with about, not a quarter of an inch, but a little more than an eighth of silicone. So because it's solid up here and this is down flat on the bottom, my mold will eventually be this way. I cut out the original and then I put it away. That was the original. Then I take the mold that was made. It'll look like this or like this. This was created just like that inside the mold. Then I take this one mold to use the resin with. This mold creates the shell. The shell is just the lines in here. It depends. The shell is the white line. This was done with a white line. This one was also done with white. I tend to use white a lot. These would be with the white lines in it because I made the base white. And notice I didn't worry about a few blue specks. They're not going to be there when the thing has been turned. They'll be turned. With the mold I created for them. And then I can reuse this over and over again. But once you get your usable shell, then you pour resin into the little components. And you can use different colors of resin if you want. I have had the help of my husband to help me get the colors in here fast enough, because by the time you mix up the resin, you divvy it into 5 different types of color and you stir the color into each of them. You've used about 7 or 8 minutes of your 12-minute time. So he's had to do pouring, not willingly, but he's done. To get them in some cases, I have to use like a needle injector, not with the metallic syringe, that's it, to get into some of the smaller portions of it. And then when I get it all filled up into the pressure pot, and then it's finished, and it'll look like, where's the one I had? No, it'll look like this. It's going to have a rough bottom on it. That rough bottom is that 1/8 of an inch here. So I usually trim them off before I sell them or give them away. I trim that off so that it's really pretty much of a square, a 7/8 square. And anything on the top gets trimmed off too. So they come out nice and neat and smooth for somebody to do it. But just one way of using the resin is just so much fun to create something. Yes.
Can you, in that rainbow thing,
Mm-hmm.
take one of the colors, do it in the pressure pot, then come back and do one of the other colors the second time around?
The question was, can you do a color, put it in the pressure pot, bring it back, do another color, put it in the pressure pot? Yes, it can go into the pressure pot as many times as you need to. That's the cured resin. You may just, that one of them in the pressure pot. Excuse me. Do fill all the colors at once, but there have been times when I get to one and I say, oh, I didn't make up the green. Okay, time's up, I've got to put it in the pot. So I'll later on come back and do the green or whatever the color is. So you can do that. Pretty, make that. Any other questions about those? Yeah.
Making the soap
Mhm.
watery or fluid is that when you're mixing it up?
The question is the fluidity on the silicone molds, the fluidity of the silicone itself. Sorry. Everything, there's quite a few different types out there. Some are thinner than others. Some are translucent, so you can see through them. Some of them, like the pink, was pretty opaque. And, yeah, right in front of me, it's gonna bite. This was pretty opaque. It was like Essos maybe. And when I blue, it wasn't a whole lot different. It's when it hardens that it became stronger. It's what they put into it, the ingredients that they use.
Does it pour like water or pour like thick paint or what?
Like thick paint in most cases, a little thinner than the paint that we've used on our house lately. Yeah. Maple syrup, maybe. I usually, before I had the pressure pot cap, I actually made my own frames like this out of cardboard and liner, and I would put it inside a metal. Knew I was going to get leakage unless you have a really nice mold that you have used or bought from somebody. Most of my handmade molds found leakage, so I've learned to put it in something else to collect that leakage. Did that answer your question? Okay. I get to talking and I forget what you asked me. Any other questions about what we've done so far?
So the colored pans you do look like you and Bob get it some time. But you can only make it one at a time.
I can only make one per mold. Yes. One per mold at a time. I have been known to make multiple molds, especially of the rainbow, because it's been so popular.
I mean, that's not Bob over there. Get it done before. I guess if you had 5, you need to do 5. If 5, you gotta go to the house.
With you really have to hustle. With the shelf thing that I made for this, I can get 5 in easily. These are no bigger than put them in the shelf than this, and I can get 3 or 4 on a shelf. But if I have the blue mold in there for the first, it just takes less. But 4 hours later, I take them out, and make a new batch. There was a time when I was making 4 batches a day. I was just, but having fun. There was another question that somebody had asked that I wanted to bring up. I want to say it's about this. You already asked if, because it's smooth here, does it have to be sanded? And I think my gut reaction is yes, but I know I've done it without. According to the books, yes, you have to sand it. They're not always 100%. A lot of this is luck and getting into things. Other questions? Yeah.
Concern on that, and I talked to Steve, if you don't sand it and you drop it, will there be, is that gonna be?
Will it shear off?
Right.
It very well could. Yeah. Dropping is another animal all into itself. If I had made this shallow enough that the screw that's in here came up to this other level, then we'd be okay. A lot of times I have a mold that I didn't bring that looks like mountains. It's just a square mold, a little bigger than this, and it has mountains going upside down in it. So I usually fill that up with resin, and I keep a bunch of them handy. Before I can here though, I have to knock the edges off or not sand them, but trim them off on the lathe or cut them off or whatever I need to do. And then when I put them down in, they become the base. I have to make sure I drill a hole in them so that the screw goes through it. Because by the time you're done with this, with the last layer of resin, you take it apart and you've got your mandrel, your wine stopper ready to go. Put the bottom on it. Oh, the question I had, somebody asked about turning. They haven't talked too much about turning. I'm a relatively new turner compared to most of you. And one of the things I started right away, which was and wood together. And I had a hard time getting used to using the proper tools. So Bob bought me a set of the carbide tools, and the carbide tools worked for me pretty well. I've now learned that I can do it with a bowl gouge without making it too awful. Resin is not one that you can cut into when you're turning it. You have to more or less shave it off. And when you shave it off, you'll get those big strings all over the place. And if you go too slow, or if your tool is not sharp, you'll hear the crackling of what sounds like glass cracking, and that is the resin cracking off. Resin will crack into little shards if you're not cutting it fast enough or with a sharp enough tool. Sometimes I use that to my advantage. If I have a piece I want a lot of depth in here, I'll go ahead and take chunks out of this and then realize what I'm left with has to conform to it. But usually you just use your carbide tools or your reverse. I'm sorry, my mind's going blank. Negative rake, yes, rake scraper. Well, on resin. That's what most is. Other questions so far? Okay. This will be ready in a few 20 minutes or so to take out. But I've had a lot of questions about stabilizing wood. I didn't have this when I first started, so I didn't use wood that needed stabilized. Of course, when I first started, I didn't know that this needed to be stabilized either. I was trying to turn it, it just blew away into pieces. But something like this, stabilizing would be real good because it'll hold the fibers together. So when I go to stabilize some wood, just a big pot. One thing you need to know about stabilizing backers, they're sold with either a glass lid or an acrylic lid. And my son bought me the vacuum chamber, and I at the time didn't know any better, so he bought it with the acrylic lid. I found out about 2 months later, the acrylic lid gets little micro fissures in it. I mean, I could watch them just crack. So I had to have them replace the lid that I had with a glass lid. So if you're buying one, go for the glass. It's well worth it, especially when you buy one with a glass lid. The mechanism will already be in the lid for you. Because mine had to be converted to lid, I had a good friend of mine work with it and put a hole in the side of the tank so that I could get my equipment in there. It was fun, everybody. He did it for me. Anyway, I use it, but I really can't fill it up past this mark now. And I can't fill it up past maybe an inch or inch and a half below it. But for me, that's good enough. I've got plenty of room. You can't do things with it. You can't do big bowls with it, but with this size, but this certainly meets my needs now that I've got the glass lid for it. You can pour the juice that you're going to use directly into this want. We're going to use cactus juice. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, would you take one of those and pass them around? These are some websites with some information. One of them about cactus juice is really interesting. If you're ever going to do any stabilizing, that is the manufacturer of the cactus juice, and he has a lot of information on his site about it. The cactus juice comes in different sizes, but I bought the gallon size. It comes with a big bottle and a little bottle. Cactus juice, before you've added the additive to it, is supposed to be good for a few years, shelf life. Once you add that little bottle to it, and I don't think it's really worth trying to measure half of that and half of this, because this stays, I think they say it's good for a year after you've opened it and put the catalyst in it. I also think that the company has said that if you've let it sit a while, you may be able to get some more catalyst and add to it and still keep it active. But you do have to keep it in a cool area. This is not set by the combination of two chemicals. This one's heat set. That's why once you put it together, it can live together and not coagulate. But when you're using it on the project, you'll have to put it in there, let it soak, let it bubble up, and then after it bubbles up and the bubbles are gone, you let it soak, and then you take it out and you drain it. And whatever didn't stay inside the wood, you can use over. Resin, a one-time shot. You mix it, you use it. The good thing about this is it can be used over and over. I will tell you though, if you add a dye to this because you want to color your wood, the dye stays in it too. So I have a nice half bottle of red at home. That's what I've used. I'm going to take this piece of wood and put it in a container. I could just put it in the bottom of this, but I don't want to waste that much of my cactus juice. And one of the reasons that I can do this here is after everybody leaves, I can pour the cactus juice out for now, take it home and finish the job. It doesn't have a time limit on it. I can just redo. Sorry. I can just redo what I'd already started. So I've got the wood in here. This cactus juice has already been activated. Don't do this. There we go. I'm going to pour it in. You're supposed to pour it to an inch above the wood, but guess what's going to happen? The wood flows. Oh my gosh. It's my. All right. Can I have the measuring cup that has the money in it over there, please? Okay, traveling with.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. First, I had my resin leak, I did not expect cactus juice to leak. Okay. Theoretically, this container is not tall enough to do this, so I'm just going to pour enough in. You need to leave at least an inch to an inch and a half at the top of your container so that it can bubble. Sorry. Yeah, I'm a mess. He knows I'm a mess. Thank you. A couple more, thanks. Thank you. I'll get it cleaned up before I leave. That's good. This is not as hard to clean up as either A or B of the regular resin, but you still want to clean it. It's kind of a thin oil, but they do call it a resin. Okay, I'm going to put this in the pressure pot in the vacuum chamber. And can you bring the camera up so that we can see in the vacuum chamber? Or do you need me to? Ah, you can see it. Okay. Just need to make sure my lid is all the way around. And then my noisy little vacuum. You can't, so maybe you can see it. My valves are open. I'm going to close my valves. No, I opened it. And I think that's the way it needs to be. Can you see the gauge moving? The highest number on there is like a minus 2930. I'm not familiar with what the gauge actually means, but the company that made it is, so they told me that to use. So that's good enough for me. You're going to start seeing bubbles around the wood as the vacuum pulls the liquid up through the wood. It's going to start making bubbles. There's some tiny ones there right now. I don't know if you can see them on screen. Oh, I can't. I can turn the pot though. There. You're not going to pull up further. A lot of times the bubbles come up so far, so you have to let air in to make them go down a little bit and then close up the gauge again so that they'll come back up. And you have to stand there and do it until it stops bubbling. And sometimes with some woods, that's a couple of hours. I don't know, who's used a vacuum chamber before? How long do you let it sit bubbling?
Maybe do it different. You can repeat.
Okay.
I suck it down and then I release it. And it's been my belief that the air pressure going back in helps force that liquid into the void some here.
You're right.
I will put it down 2 or 3, 4 times.
Yeah, what Charlie's saying is he lets it start to bubble and then he lets air in. And the pressure helps pull the liquid back up through the wood. And he does it multiple times until it stops bubbling. And that's what we really should do. Now you can start to see the bubbles around the outside, small little bubbles. I usually don't have to leave mine sit more than 40 minutes. And I'm always in the room with it because you don't want it to overflow or you've got to clean out your big pot, which isn't a big deal because this is easily soap and water washable. Cactus juice. That's the good thing. But you don't want it to come up any input valve or output valve. That valve right there is sacred. You don't want anything in it because that will ruin the mechanism to be pulled back into your vacuum. And then you have to go buy another vacuum. And I've been told I'm only allowed one for a lifetime. No, so just have to be careful with it. Questions about this part?
How do you tell when the cactus juice goes bad?
How do you tell when it goes bad? Good question. I don't know that I know the answer. I've used cactus juice, some of it for 2 years with colorant, and it still bubbles for me. So yeah, as long as it shakes, it takes heat to set it. And I do believe that you can buy extra additive if it should die. I mean, if it should not function right. So that's one of the things that you'll find on the Turntex website on that paper I gave you.
Depends where you guys are looking for these bubbles.
Can you see them on the outside of the wood? Normally, I'd have that cactus juice up high enough to cover the wood and something to weigh it down too. And then it would be bubbling at the top. But I can't do that because my,
So don't look at the fluid next to the wood, in the wood and the measuring gun.
Yeah.
You see a whole bunch of them. At least from the 2 foot.
I actually talked to one of the people at Turntex one day, and because I was totally new to this and I didn't realize that you could use a smaller pot inside. I thought, that's a 5-gallon tank. I can't afford 5 gallons of cactus juice. And she says, no, you can put it in anything smaller, anything your wood will fit in with a room above for the bubbles to expand. She said she's even done it in a plastic bag. I haven't tried the plastic bag on that. I tried it on something else with regular resin, but
That's not gonna stabilize.
it's not going to stabilize the top at all. This is only stabilizing the part that's underwater, under fluid. I will have to, as I said I was going to do, take it home and finish it up. I can flip it over, but yeah, I'd rather just take it and let it sit. You're not just, when you pull the bubbles in, pulling the bubbles up through the top, that's one part of it. And then you turn your vacuum off and you let it sit and dwell and just stay nice and cozy in your pot for at least twice as long as it bubbles. I usually do it overnight or all the next day or whatever. Yeah,
Do you release the vacuum before that or leave it?
I leave it vacuum. If I were to use the chamber for, say, 30 minutes to get the bubbles to stop coming up, I would leave it closed up for at least an hour to 2, but I usually do it overnight. You can't, it maintains it because of the seal on this one, it maintains its vacuum. Not everything, the DIYs may not, but still, if you do it for a couple of hours, you'll be fine. 2, if you're adding color to this, you may want to even extend the time that you're using the vacuum. Or you may want to, once it's done, the whole process, just flip it over and do it again to get more intensity in there because the wood only picks up a little bit of the color that you use. And the coloring that you can use is the same liquid colorant that you could use in resin. You would not use a mica powder on it. You want it to be fine enough to be picked up by the fibers in there. Any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to turn it off and let it sit for a minute so you can see it's still going to bubble for a few minutes. The unit's off. This is one thing that once you're done with the bubbles, you can turn that off. Vacuum chamber, as soon as you bring it up to pressure, as long as you've got a good seal, you can let it go. That's something I was starting this, and I thought you had to keep the pressure on, and that pump that we have is really kind of like it echoes out the house. So it's good that I only need to use it about 5 minutes at a time. Okay. See how the bubbles are lessening now? That's going to happen. And you're going to bring it up, take it down a few times. Okay. Other questions? I think that's all they need to see. Besides, how can I make such a mess? See, I'm not even home and I'm making a mess. Did you have a question?
You are a minute from 2 hours.
All right. You know what? We'll take a chance. Bob, will you do the honors? No, this one. It was closed.
The vacuum pump will not hold the vacuum.
Oh,
Right. It'll
Okay.
Back.
thank you. Did that, he closed the vacuum after the, yeah. He came up with this tool for twisting because I've done crafts all my life. My hands should be very strong and they're not. Well, the first thing we have to do with this is let the air out.
Don't let the air out.
He's not going to get it unlocked. And we usually filter it through some, so it's not going into the room. It's down 0, ready to go. So any other questions while he's doing that?
Just so you know, if you push one of these wrenches,
Or something for torque?
you will never get it off. And when you do seal it crosshand, so that this and this will be done, then this will be done. Not in particular order, but
Well, it does make it easier if you do opposites first. If you go from one place to the other, it's going to be harder to do the last two. It's just those of you with things like that, I'm sure you recognize. Let me just go back over some. Careful. Now, let's get back to this page. Some tips for success. Keep your molds clean. Duh. Store your resin at room temperature or in your basement, as long as it's in a dry area. Next one. Use dry inclusion, putting something in it, stick or whatever. Make sure it's dry, that you didn't just wash it off in the sink and put it in there. Measure accurately. Measuring and mixing are the two most important things you need to do with resin, because if you don't measure it right and don't mix it right, you'll have problems. Now, when I talk about measuring, I went over measuring by weight versus measuring by volume. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, because I didn't really understand what measuring by volume was. What did you say?
sure, they put that huge box on
Yes.
by weight, by
So your cereal is about 2 inches off the bottom of the box and you paid for it. You're paying for the air. Yeah, that's definitely the case. Know your working time for the resin that you're using, your pot time, that's working time. Use mold release if appropriate. Now, I didn't mold release. This is a kind you can buy online. There is one by craft stores. It's a little squirty bottle, but I just think there's too much liquid in that, possibly too much water to be used with the aluminite products, even though they for that. And I don't use resin or the spray on any of the molds that are 2-part. And I think I told you that before. Okay, little bit of overspill. And see, this is still, oh, it's still sticky. Okay. This is not going to come back up because it's firm enough, but I definitely wouldn't try to take it out of the mold right now. I'll pass that around. You could get a fingerprint in there, which ready. Yeah, fingerprints not hurt me at all. It'll get turned off. So yeah, you're touching the outside. And if you need some alcohol to wipe your hands off, clean up with resin is either alcohol or nail polish, acetone. And I hate acetone, so I use, yeah, here's another one we can pass around. The rubber bands are on this because it's been used so much that the sides sort of bow out a little bit. So I just put a little bit of pressure on with those rubber bands. So when I'm doing something like this, right?
You know, like, you like acetone.
I'm just not a acetone person, but I think that a lot of people do like it better. I just know that I can buy alcohol. 91% or 91% works pretty good. Yes.
Denatured alcohol from the hardware store is cheaper than buying it at the drugstore.
Did you all hear that? Denatured alcohol from the hardware store. A lot of times it's sold under the name of fuel. For
Camp stove fuel is also denatured.
yeah,
They gave you Jack Daniels.
no, not at all. You do have to be careful with the denatured alcohol about where you're storing it and what you're using it near. I think it's more volatile than the other alcohol, but that's me. It doesn't have any water in it? Okay, cool. Protect your surroundings. I told you I use the parchment paper and clean up the unhardened resin with alcohol or the other. And when you're turning or sanding, especially when you're sanding, wear something over your face. Wear a dust mask. The fine dust particles of resin is not good. That a lot of people that become sensitive to it end up having to wear the mask with the two respirator. That's it. I have one, but if I'm doing the resin in a small place, I'll use it. But if I'm doing it in a big area, I'll just put a face mask on. I didn't today because this was a really big area and you wouldn't be able to hear me. Also, when you're pouring it, it likes most all of the alcohol resins like being poured in a 70 to 75 degree room. They don't like to be cold. They like to be where I would cook in a 5-degree room. Some recommend 80, but that's where it would be. Okay, be careful to wear your PPE, your gloves, your mask, read the directions, and beware of the humidity. Work in a well-ventilated area. And anything that you add to the resin, such as colors or whatnot, should be less than 5% of the total volume. Do you understand that? You don't want to have a whole bunch of color and a tiny little bit of resin in there, because too much of the foreign object is going to keep your resin from hardening, working right. So you just use up to 5%. And frankly, I never go anywhere near the 5% when I'm adding my color, and just very little. Beware of your exothermic heat. That's what's created when the two chemicals combine. And yeah, when you're sanding, wear the appropriate mask. So.
Humidity that you've experienced from when I'm humidity, right? Do you experience problems with your production?
Do I experience problems with resin when it's humid? Yes, absolutely yes. I have, I don't usually pour resin on a rainy day or when it's been raining for 2 or 3 days. I definitely don't pour the slow when it's humid. I've actually got a little barometer in my room that tells me moisture level is in the room. And it's ranging. When I first started, it was 45. And now I've got it down to 35. I put a few of those desiccant damp rid containers in the room. Funny, but I've got about 3 of them in there now to keep the humidity, and I keep my door closed so that the house doesn't have to be that low in humidity, and keep it closed to keep the heat in that room, which backfires in the summer, of course, but still. So in your room, if you're doing it in your basement and you've got a very humid basement, you could have problems. Alumilite. Other resins do a little better, but try it out on a sample. If you buy a new resin, don't put all your resin into something this big. It's a lot of waste. And just in case you're wondering, this was not poured all at once, and this is not made out of just one type of resin. These are made in a mold that's upside down. And you build from the tip up, from the bottom up. And you layer one layer at a time. I have one layer, you can see the silver there that I put at the end of that layer. And then I have a second layer. You can see the lines on this, but you have to hang any of your inclusions upside down, which gets tricky, but you can be creative with that. It's lots of fun. And then on the rows, for this section here, the midsection, I used a resin that I could pour as much as 4 inches. It was a 2 to 4 inch pour resin. It didn't get hot. It didn't bubble a lot. And it didn't set quickly. So you have to leave it about 3 days before you can do the next step. Some of these other resins were much quicker. They were tabletop resins. And I could pour a layer and then it'd be dry by the next day and I'd pour another layer. When I make my big things like this, the mold that it's in, I have learned to take a piece of tape and stick it right on the outside of the box. These pyramid molds actually come in a square box to hold it in a frame. Some other molds do too, but they come in a frame. And what I do is I tape a note on the outside of the frame as to what type of resin I used. And when I poured it, I may say deep pour Saturday morning. And then I'll have another piece of tape up here, Alumilite clear Monday night, and so on, so that I know later on what I used. I do that right now so I can find out which resins are better for what. There are some resins that will melt sort of in the sun, and I had some people telling me about it. And I leave the hole in the bottom, mainly to put in a roll of the pixie lights so that you give them to kids or whatever. I put a piece of wood at the bottom and attach it with Velcro with the pixie lights captured in between, and they're kind of neat. This one I brought, and I'm going to pass it around. And tell me what you think of it. There is a mistake in it. A big, bad mistake. No, right side up. Feel the bottom layer. It's squishy. The bottom layer is squishy because I used a resin that was meant to be 2 to 4 inches of pouring, and it's only less than a ½ inch. So it didn't have enough of it to harden properly. So I can't use that unless I'm peeling it off, and I'm not taking the time just now to do that. So you do have to read the directions. That's why I say it all the time. Any other questions?
Linda Hand.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for putting up with me.